In my 4 decades sitting on this bench, I've witnessed plenty of anger. People get furious at the police. They get furious at the whole system. And yes, they get furious at me too. But most of the time that anger stays contained. It simmers quietly beneath the surface. What took place in my courtroom on a sweltering Tuesday last July, though, was something else entirely. It erupted. It was visceral. And truthfully, it scared me. If you still believe patience is a virtue worth protecting in this fast-moving world, go ahead and smash that subscribe button right now. You're going to want to stick around for how this story wraps up, because this wasn't simply a guy blowing his top in public. This was a man who had completely lost his moral compass, and the real question was whether this courtroom could help him locate it again. Let me paint the picture. It was one of those muggy Providence afternoons where the humidity clings to your skin like a second shirt. The courthouse AC was fighting for its life, droning constantly, but the tension in the room was thicker than the heat. My clerk Donna, the steady heartbeat of this entire operation, leaned in close right before we began. She murmured, "Judge, the calendar is packed and folks are already wound tight." I gave her a small nod. You can walk into a courtroom and instantly read the atmosphere. Some days it's weighed down with grief. Some days it crackles with nervousness. That morning it felt like a coiled spring on the verge of snapping. About 60 minutes into the session, I just wrapped up a minor matter. A grandmother who'd parked illegally to dash in and grab her husband's prescription. Ticket dismissed. Naturally. Mercy comes before paperwork. The room settled. Then, without warning, the heavy double doors at the rear flew open with a thunderous bang that bounced off every wall. Heads whipped around. Officer Santos, posted near the rail, snapped to attention. Striding down the center aisle came a man dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first house down payment. He was moving with purpose, aggression radiating off him, barking into his phone at full volume. "I don't care, close the deal. Close it now." He was yelling inside an active courtroom session. I've cultivated a long fuse over the years. My father drilled it into me. "Frankie, everybody's carrying a private war you'll never see. So I always try to extend grace first." But this was deliberate in-your-face contempt, not only toward me, but toward every single person sitting there. The single moms waiting patiently, the seniors on fixed incomes, the officers quietly doing their duty. Officer Santos stepped forward into the aisle and raised a calm but firm hand. "Sir, you need to end the call and find a seat. Court is in progress." Most people, when a uniformed officer speaks, they comply. They mutter sorry. They look sheepish. This man didn't even slow down. He glanced at Officer Santos the way you'd glance at an inconvenient chair blocking your path. He cupped the phone briefly and snarled, "Do you have any clue how much revenue I'm bleeding right now? Back off." A collective inhale swept the room. You could have heard a feather land. Even the air conditioner seemed to pause. That old familiar pressure built behind my sternum. This wasn't mere noise anymore. This was a direct challenge to the authority of the court itself. He finally ended the call, not out of respect, but because he'd finished saying what he needed to say. He jammed the phone into his pocket and barreled straight to the podium, shoving past a young woman who was already positioned there waiting her turn. He dropped a thick folder onto the defense table with a smack. "Let's make this quick," he ordered. He didn't glance at me. He didn't acknowledge Donna. His eyes were glued to the face of his watch. If you believe respect shouldn't be optional, it should be the baseline. Please share this video right now. I drew in a slow, deliberate breath. I straightened my glasses. I met his gaze squarely. I didn't shout. I've learned over many years, when the other person is yelling, the strongest response is often the quietest one. I simply said, "Good morning." He jerked his head up, almost surprised, as though he'd only just noticed there was actually a judge seated a few feet higher than him. No reply. Just an irritated huff and a dramatic eye roll toward the ceiling. "I'm in a hurry," he announced. "I've got a flight in under 2 hours. Can we skip the small talk?" I leaned slightly forward. "Sir," I replied, voice level and even, "in this courtroom, the small talk is the procedure. You just disrespected a law enforcement officer. You cut the line in front of this young woman. You interrupted an ongoing judicial proceeding. We aren't skipping a single step. In fact, we're going to pause right here and make sure you understand exactly where you are." He stared back at me, eyelids fluttering fast, like the idea of waiting was an alien concept. No apology. No retreat. Just another impatient tap on that overpriced watch. Listen, he said, voice thick with superiority. I've got a merger closing in Manhattan. My time runs about $5,000 an hour. So if we could just handle the fine, I'll cut the check and everybody can get back to their day. He reached inside his jacket, produced a slim black leather checkbook, and flicked open a heavy gold pen. He looked at me expectantly, the way you'd look at someone behind a fast food counter. I could feel every pair of eyes in the gallery locked on me, waiting to see whether I'd let cash erase arrogance. It would have been the easy path, accept the payment, move the calendar along, send him on his way. But that's not the reason I wear this robe. I shifted my gaze past him to the young woman he'd bulldozed. She was gripping a wrinkled citation, dressed in a worn server's uniform from a neighborhood diner. She'd almost certainly lost wages just to show up today. She didn't earn $5,000 an hour. She probably didn't have $5,000 in total savings. Sir, I said, letting my voice drop lower, put the checkbook away. He froze. Excuse me. Put it away, I repeated, and step back. His face flushed crimson with fury. Step back, I said again, this time carrying more volume. He finally retreated half a step, looking like a spoiled kid forced to return a confiscated toy. I gestured toward the young woman. Miss, please step forward. She moved to the bench slowly, hands trembling. I'm so sorry, Your Honor, she whispered. I didn't mean to upset him. My heart sank. She was apologizing for his behavior. You have absolutely nothing to apologize for, I told her softly. In this courtroom, no one is more important than anyone else. Not him. Not me. And definitely not his bank account. We are going to hear your matter first, exactly as scheduled. The man let out an exaggerated, theatrical groan and flung both hands skyward. Unbelievable, he muttered, loud enough for the entire back row to catch it. This is ridiculous. A total joke. I didn't acknowledge him. I kept my focus on the young woman. Her violation was straightforward. An expired parking meter. She explained she'd pulled a double shift and couldn't get back to the car in time. She spoke plainly, humbly, respectfully. I dismissed the ticket. When that relieved smile finally broke across her face, the whole room seemed to exhale with her. Thank you, Judge, she said quietly. God bless you. As she stepped away, the man immediately reclaimed the podium without being called. Finished with the charity cases? He sneered. Can we finally handle actual business? That was the precise instant I realized this hearing wasn't going to be routine. This man didn't merely need a penalty. He needed a wake-up call. I caught Officer Santos's eye and gave a subtle nod. He eased a step closer to the defendant, just in case. I opened the file in front of me. I'd assumed it was a routine parking citation, perhaps a minor traffic ticket. But when I scanned the charges, a chill ran through me. Mr. Sterling, I said, speaking his name aloud for the first time, you appear to be in quite a rush. You appear to believe your time is the single most valuable thing in this room. Yet according to this report, your hurry very nearly took a crossing guard's life. He flicked his hand dismissively. She was standing in the street. She shouldn't have been there. I lifted my eyes from the page and deliberately removed my glasses. She was standing in the street, I repeated slowly, because she was directing traffic so a school bus full of children could load safely. And you chose to drive around her, on the sidewalk. The gallery gasped again. He didn't blink. I didn't strike her, did I? He shot back. No one was injured. It's a traffic citation. Let's not turn it into a national incident. I held his stare. I thought of my own grandchildren crossing the street. I thought of the men and women who stand in blizzards and downpours to keep those children safe. And here stood a man who'd driven on a sidewalk to shave 2 minutes off his day, now asking me to hurry up. I eased back in my chair. Oh, we are going to turn this into a case, Mr. Sterling. Just not the kind you can settle with a check. Mr. Sterling blinked at me, momentarily speechless, as though I'd started speaking in a foreign tongue. The very notion that money couldn't solve this seemed to overload his circuits. He exhaled the long, patronizing sigh you give a child who's taking forever to buckle their shoes. Your Honor, he said, stretching each syllable with fake tolerance. I get that safety matters. I really do. But as I already explained, no one was hurt. It was a calculated risk. I spotted an opening. I took it. That's how deals get done. That's how you navigate traffic too. So can we please just resolve the penalty? Calculated risk. I echoed the phrase, tasting the sourness of it. You weighed the risk to your schedule against the risk to another human being's life. And you decided your schedule mattered more. He gave a careless shrug. Actually shrugged. It's a sidewalk, he said. It's not a highway. She shouldn't have been blocking the only way out of the school zone. She was the obstacle. The obstacle. He reduced a human being, a 74-year-old woman who dedicated her life to protecting children, to an obstacle. A cold, heavy anger settled deep in my gut. Not the quick burn of fury, but something far weightier. The slow, sinking realization of how completely disconnected this man was from the very community he drove through every day. I glanced at my clerk, Donna. Her hand was pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. I looked over at Officer Santos. His jaw was clenched so hard I half expected to hear bone crack. Mr. Sterling, I said, keeping my voice low and measured, I want you to turn around. He frowned. Why? Just turn around, I repeated, firmer this time. Look toward the back of the courtroom. He huffed, straightened his jacket like he was posing for a magazine cover, and pivoted slowly. The double doors eased open again. No dramatic slam this time, just the gentle squeak of rubber-soled shoes on the worn linoleum. An elderly woman stepped inside. She wore a bright neon yellow safety vest layered over a heavy wool coat, and she carried a stop sign tucked under her arm like an extension of herself. She walked with a slight limp, favoring her left hip. Her gray hair was neatly pulled into a practical bun. She looked weary, but her gaze was clear and steady. She could have been any grandmother, the one who bakes cookies for the block kids, the one who waves at every passing school bus. Do you know who that is? I asked the defendant. He gave her a fleeting glance, then turned back to me, expression flat and bored. I assume that's the obstacle, he replied. A ripple of outrage rolled through the gallery. Someone in the rear shouted, "Show some respect." Officer Santos stepped forward, raising a hand to restore quiet. That, I said, my voice slicing cleanly through the murmurs, is Mrs. Kowalski. She has served as a crossing guard in the city for 25 years. She has stood on that same corner through pouring rain, freezing sleet, and blistering 90-degree heat to ensure children make it to school safely. She is 74 years old. Mr. Sterling checked his watch again. Okay, he said dismissively. She's a saint. I get it. Can I pay her? Is that what this is about? You want me to write her a check for her distress? He reached for his checkbook once more. He never once looked directly at Mrs. Kowalski. He didn't notice her hands trembling as they gripped the railing. He didn't see the single tear tracing down her cheek, not from sorrow, but from the deep humiliation of being reduced to a mere traffic hazard instead of a fellow human being. Put the checkbook away, I said. This time my voice carried like thunder across the room. It startled him. The pen slipped from his fingers and clattered loudly on the floor. You think this is about money? I continued. That right there is your tragedy, Mr. Sterling. You believe everything has a price tag. You believe that because you possess a great deal of money, the basic rules of human decency no longer apply to you. You believe you can purchase your way out of having poor character. I gestured for Mrs. Kowalski to approach. Mrs. Kowalski, please take your time coming forward. She moved slowly to the microphone, standing just a few feet from the man who had nearly taken her life in exchange for 5 extra minutes. She lifted her eyes to me, voice quavering. Judge Caprio, she began, I've never been so frightened in my life. I saw his car veering onto the sidewalk. I waved my sign. I blew my whistle as loud as I could, but he just kept coming. I had to throw myself into the bushes. If I hadn't moved, she paused, wiping her eyes. My hip hasn't been the same since. Mr. Sterling rolled his eyes. Oh, here come the medical bills, he muttered, barely under his breath. But I heard him, she finished quietly. And for the first time in a long while, disappointment wasn't enough. I felt resolve harden inside me. I was going to erase that smug look from his face, not with a gavel's bang, but with unfiltered truth. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "you're worried about missing your flight to New York?" He nodded sharply. "Yes. I'm already going to be late." "Well," I replied, easing back in my chair, "I have some bad news for you. You're not going to New York today." "You can't do that," he exploded, voice finally cracking as the polished corporate mask shattered. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who I represent? If I miss this meeting, the entire deal collapses. Millions of dollars. Gone. You can't just hold me here." He scanned the room desperately for support. He found only the hard stares of the bailiffs and the quiet disappointment of the people whose community he had endangered. "I can," I answered evenly, "and I just did." "Mr. Sterling, you seem to think this is a business negotiation. It is not. You are in a court of law, not a boardroom. And in this room, your net worth does not dictate your departure time. Your conduct does." I lifted his driver's license, the one Officer Santos had placed on my bench earlier. "And right now, your conduct tells me you are a danger to the public. You drove on a sidewalk. You nearly struck a pedestrian. And your only concern has been your bank account." He slammed his palm on the podium. "It was an accident. A calculated move. I told you that already." "No," I cut in firmly. "An accident is something unforeseen. A calculation is a deliberate choice. You chose to put Mrs. Kowalski at risk, and because you made that choice, I am making one of my own. I am suspending your driving privileges in the state of Rhode Island, effective immediately, pending a full psychiatric evaluation and completion of an anger management program." The blood drained from his face. "Psychiatric? Are you calling me crazy?" "I'm calling you reckless," I replied. "I'm calling you entitled. And until I am satisfied that you can operate a vehicle without treating human lives like inconveniences to be swerved around, you will not be getting behind the wheel." He sagged against the podium, the reality hitting him. His private jet might be fueled and waiting, but he would not be boarding it. The silence that settled over the courtroom was thick and heavy. I turned back to Mrs. Kowalski. She was still shaking, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue Donna had quietly passed her. "Mrs. Kowalski," I asked gently, "do you have children?" She nodded, sniffling. 3. And 7 grandchildren." "7 grandchildren," I repeated, then looked directly at Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, do you have a family?" He didn't answer at first, just stared down at his polished shoes, perhaps mentally tallying the cost of his missed flight. "Mr. Sterling," I pressed. "Yes," he muttered. "A daughter." "She's 6, he added reluctantly. 6, I echoed. "The same age as many of the children Mrs. Kowalski protects every single morning. Now I want you to imagine something. Close your eyes." He hesitated, defiance flickering. "Close them," I ordered again. Reluctantly, he complied. "Picture your daughter walking to school. Backpack on, full of excitement, skipping along the sidewalk. Then a car suddenly surges up over the curb because a businessman is running late for a meeting. The crossing guard waves her sign, blows her whistle, but the car doesn't stop. The driver thinks the guard is just an obstacle." I let the scene linger in the silence. "Now open your eyes." He lifted his head. The flush was gone. His face was ashen. "Would you want that driver to simply write a check?" I asked. "Would $5,000 make it right if he struck her? Would $1 million? Would all the money from your merger bring her back?" He said nothing. For the first time, no quick retort. No glance at his watch. Just a hard swallow, his Adam's apple rising and falling. "Mrs. Kowalski is not an obstacle," I continued, my voice softening yet holding every ounce of its strength. "She is a protector. She earns in a full year what you likely spend on a single weekend getaway. But let me tell you something, Mr. Sterling. In this courtroom, and in the eyes of any person with a conscience, she stands 10 feet taller than you do right now. She possesses something your money has never purchased for you." I leaned forward. "She has dignity, and she has earned the genuine respect of her community." He finally looked, really looked, at Mrs. Kowalski. He saw the frayed collar of her coat. He saw the hearing aid tucked behind her left ear. He saw the fear in her eyes slowly giving way to quiet strength. He began, but the words died in his throat. I didn't think. Exactly, I said. You didn't think. You calculated. And your math was disastrously wrong. You forgot to include the human variable. I turned the gavel over slowly in my hands. But we are not finished yet. Suspending your license is only the start. You owe a debt in this courtroom, and it cannot be settled with a check. Mr. Sterling stared at me, panic and bewilderment warring across his features. He clutched his checkbook in one hand, his phone in the other, as though deciding which instrument could extract him from this predicament. What do you mean, a debt? He stammered. I can pay the fine. I can pay double. Just tell me the number. That, I said, leaning in, is precisely your problem. You believe numbers fix everything. But you cannot assign a dollar value to fear. You cannot write a check to erase the trauma you inflicted on Mrs. Kowalski. The only way to repay that debt is with your time, the one resource you seem to prize above all else. I picked up my pen and began writing on the docket. Since your time is worth $5,000 an hour, I believe it's only fair the community receives a return on that value. I am ordering you to complete 100 hours of community service. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. 100 hours is no small sentence. Sterling's jaw dropped. 100 hours? That's 2 full weeks of work. I run a corporation. I have shareholders. And Mrs. Kowalski has grandchildren, I countered calmly. Right now, I care far more about her grandchildren than I do about your shareholders. But here's the condition, I continued. You won't be filing paperwork in an air-conditioned office. You won't be making phone calls. You'll be working directly with the city's Department of Public Works, specifically on the pedestrian safety maintenance crew. You'll be painting crosswalks. You'll be replacing the very signs you chose to ignore. You'll be out there in the heat, in the humidity, experiencing firsthand what it actually takes to keep these streets safe for everyone. He looked horrified. Manual labor? I have allergies. I have a bad back. And Mrs. Kowalski has a bad hip, I reminded him evenly, because she had to dive into bushes to avoid being struck by your luxury sedan. If she can stand on a corner for 4 hours a day, you can hold a paintbrush. I turned to Mrs. Kowalski. Ma'am, does that sound fair to you? She looked directly at him, not with anger, but with a quiet, unshakable dignity that seemed to expand and fill the entire room. Your Honor, she said softly, I don't want him to suffer. I just want him to slow down. I want him to see us. Those words struck me like a quiet thunderclap. I want him to see us. That's all any of us really want, to be seen, to be acknowledged as a person, not reduced to an inconvenience or an obstacle. Did you hear that, Mr. Sterling? I asked. She doesn't want your money. She doesn't want your suffering. She simply wants to be seen. Can you do that? Can you step down from your high tower long enough to recognize the people whose quiet work built the very foundation you stand on? He looked at Mrs. Kowalski, really looked at her, for the second time. The arrogance was still there, clinging desperately, but it was fracturing. Fine, he gritted out through clenched teeth. 100 hours. I'll hire a driver to get me there since you took my license. One more thing, I added, raising a single finger. You mentioned earlier that your time is worth $5,000 an hour. Well, Mrs. Kowalski earns $15 an hour. So for every hour of community service you complete, I want you to match your own valuation. You will donate $5,000, for each hour you work, to the Children's Hospital Trauma Center. That totals $500,000. The courtroom fell into absolute, stunned silence. Even Donna's typing stopped. Mr. Sterling looked like someone had driven a fist into his stomach. Half a million, he whispered. You said you wanted to write a check, I replied with a small shrug. You said money was the easy part. So prove it. Do the work. Make the donation. And maybe, just maybe, you'll begin to understand the true value of a single human life. He stood there, motionless, stripped bare of every excuse, every layer of power he'd wrapped himself in. For the first time, he looked small. And for the first time, he looked like he might actually be hearing what was being said to him. He left the courtroom without another word. No thank you, no farewell. just the stiff mechanical walk of a man whose armor had been peeled away. The heavy oak doors closed behind him with a soft thud, and the silence in the room held for several long seconds. People turned to look at me. Some smiled, feeling justice had finally been delivered. Others looked doubtful, wondering whether a man with that much wealth would ever truly pick up a paint roller. I wondered the same thing myself. It's easy to issue a sentence. It's far harder to change a heart. For 2 full weeks, I heard nothing. I assumed his lawyers were already drafting appeals, or he'd found some loophole to pay someone else to serve the hours in his place. I braced myself for a battle. Then one morning, an email arrived from the Department of Public Works supervisor. Attached was a photograph. There was Mr. Sterling, not in his tailored Italian suit, but in a neon-orange safety vest streaked with sweat and yellow road paint. He was down on his knees, scraping old chewing gum off a crosswalk. He didn't look happy. He looked miserable. But he was there. The supervisor's note was brief. First 3 days were rough. He complained about the heat, the noise, the tools. Tried to buy everyone lunch to get out of scraping duty. I told him we pack our own sandwiches here. But yesterday, something shifted. I leaned back in my chair, curious. What could possibly change a man like that in just 4 days? The report continued, describing an incident on a Thursday afternoon. Mr. Sterling was repainting the white lines at the exact same intersection where he had once driven up on the sidewalk. It was 2:30 p.m. School dismissal bell rang, and the doors flew open, spilling children onto the sidewalks in a wave of laughter and energy. He was crouched on the pavement, focused on the yellow line, when a sudden rush of air hit him. A sleek, expensive sports car, not unlike the one he used to drive, came screaming around the corner, ignoring the flashing 15 miles per hour school zone lights. The driver was on his phone, laughing, completely unaware. He swerved at the last possible second to miss Mr. Sterling's cones, tires shrieking on the asphalt just inches from where Sterling knelt. Mr. Sterling fell backward in terror, scrambling onto the grass, heart hammering in his chest. He watched the car race off, the driver never once glancing back. In that single, shattering moment, the mirror cracked. He was no longer the driver. He was the obstacle. He was the vulnerable one on the ground, invisible, terrified, disregarded. He felt the whoosh of wind from the car, the heat radiating off the engine, the total indifference to his life. He sat there on the grass for a long time. The supervisor tried to tell him to take a break, but Mr. Sterling just shook his head. He stood up, hands trembling, and looked at the crosswalk he was painting. He looked at the children waiting on the curb, watching him with wide, curious eyes. He looked at the white lines, the thin barrier separating those kids from the kind of recklessness he had just experienced, and the kind he himself had once embodied only weeks earlier. He didn't take a break. He picked up the roller again. But this time he didn't rush. He didn't glance at his watch. He painted that line thick. He painted it bright. He went over it twice, making sure it stood out sharply against the black asphalt. He wasn't just serving a sentence anymore. He was drawing a line in the sand. He was building a shield. And as he worked, a little boy, maybe 7 years old, walked past. The boy paused, stared at the fresh, vivid yellow paint, then looked up at the sweating man in the orange vest. "Thanks, mister," the boy said simply. "Now the cars have to stop." Mr. Sterling didn't announce that he was a CEO. He didn't mention that his time was worth $5,000 an hour. He just wiped sweat from his forehead with a grimy glove and managed, in a choked voice, "You're welcome, son. You be safe." The supervisor noted that he worked 2 hours past his shift that day. He wanted to finish the entire intersection before the sun set. When the 60 days were complete, Mr. Sterling returned to my courtroom. I remember it clearly because the contrast was almost jarring. He didn't burst through the doors. He didn't shout into a phone. He didn't cut in line. He entered quietly, hat in hand, and took a seat in the very last row. He waited. He waited patiently through 3 full hours of truancy cases, parking violations, and noise complaints, watched single mothers explain their situations. He watched elderly people struggle to understand the proceedings. He simply watched. When I finally called his name, he rose slowly. He approached the bench, not with his former swagger, but with a careful, almost tentative step. He looked tired. His hands were rough and calloused, I could see the changes even from the bench. The manicured nails were gone. The $5,000 suit had been replaced by a plain button-down shirt and slacks. He looked ordinary. And in that ordinariness, he finally looked like a real man. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," I said. He nodded with quiet respect. "Good morning, Your Honor." He didn't check his watch. He didn't ask to hurry things along. He just stood there, waiting for me to speak. "I have the report from the Department of Public Works," I said, tapping the file. "It says you completed 112 hours, 12 more than required. And the donation." He reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope. He handed it to Donna. Inside was a check for $560,000, matching his own hourly valuation for every single hour he had worked. Donna's eyes widened as she read the amount. It was a fortune. Enough to equip the trauma center with new life-saving tools. Enough to make a real difference. But Mr. Sterling didn't look triumphant. He looked humbled. "That is an extraordinarily generous amount," I said. "It will do a tremendous amount of good. But I want to know about the hours. I want to know about the time. What did you learn out there on the asphalt that you could never have learned in a boardroom?" He drew in a deep breath. He gripped the podium, knuckles whitening. "Your Honor," he began, voice rough and low, "I learned that concrete is hard. I learned that the sun is hot. But mostly, I learned that I am small." The room went still. This was the same man who, just 2 months earlier, had acted as though he were the center of the universe. "One afternoon," he continued, staring down at his weathered hands, "I was painting a line. A car swerved. It missed me by inches. The driver didn't even look. He was on his phone. He was laughing. And in that moment, lying there on the grass, shaking, I realized something terrifying. To him, I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't rich. I wasn't powerful. I was just roadkill. I was just something in his way." He lifted his eyes to me, and they were shining with unshed tears. I realized that's exactly who I was to Mrs. Kowalski. I was the man in the car. I was the man who thought he was too important to stop. He turned toward Mrs. Kowalski, who sat quietly in the front row, clutching her purse like an anchor. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracking on the word, "I am so sorry. Not because I got caught. Not because I had to pay. But because I didn't see you. I promise you, I see you now. And I will never, ever look through you again." Mrs. Kowalski rose slowly. She looked at this man, this stranger who had nearly ended her life, and she did something that captures the very soul of this courtroom. She didn't scold him. She didn't lecture him. She simply nodded, a small, sad smile touching her lips, and said, "Thank you, son. That's all I wanted, just to be seen." I felt a lump rise in my throat. This is why we do what we do. This is why justice isn't only about punishment. It's about restoration. It's about taking a fractured piece of the human family and trying, with care and patience, to mend it through understanding. Mr. Sterling had paid his debt, yes, but he had accomplished something far greater. He had reclaimed his humanity. And no check in the world is large enough to purchase that. The room felt lighter. The heavy tension that had entered with Mr. Sterling 2 months earlier had dissolved, replaced by a quiet, profound respect. I glanced at the check in Donna's hand. Over $500,000 that would save countless children's lives. It was an astonishing sum. But as I looked at Mr. Sterling, I knew the true currency exchanged here wasn't financial. It was moral. "Mr. Sterling," I said, breaking the stillness, "you came into my courtroom believing you could buy your way out of trouble. You believed your wallet made you untouchable. But today, you proved something infinitely more important. You proved that it is never too late to learn. You proved that a person is not defined by the size of their bank account, but by their willingness to change." I stamped his file. Case closed. The sharp sound of the stamp on paper usually marks an ending, but this time it felt like the beginning of something new. "Your license is reinstated," I told him. "But I have a feeling you'll be driving a little differently from now on." He nodded, and for the first time, a genuine smile softened his face. "I will, Your Honor. And I think I'm going to keep the vest. As a reminder," he added quietly. He shook hands with Mrs. Kowalski, gently, respectfully, human to human. He shook hands with Officer Santos. Then he turned to me. "Thank you, Judge," he said, voice steady now, "for not letting me off the hook, for making me stop." He walked out of the courtroom. No strut. No rush. He walked like a man who finally understood where he was headed. As the doors closed behind him, I looked over at Donna. She wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled. "That was a good day's work, Judge," she whispered. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the familiar weight of the robe on my shoulders. It's heavy, this job. Some nights it keeps me awake. I worry about the people I can't reach. I worry about the ones who leave angry and stay angry. But then there are days like today. Days when the system works, not because of the strict letter of the law, but because of its spirit. My father used to tell me, "Frankie, you can't force a seed to grow. You can only water it." That's what we did here. We watered a seed of humility in a heart that had grown as hard as concrete. And against every expectation, it bloomed. We live in a world that shouts at us to go faster, earn more, climb higher. We glorify the hustle, the grind, the me-first mentality. But if we lose our ability to see the person standing on the corner, the crossing guard, the cashier, the stranger in our path, then we have lost everything that truly matters. Speed means nothing if you're headed in the wrong direction. Mr. Sterling learned that the hard way. But he learned it. And I hope, by sharing his story, we can all learn it a little more gently. Slow down. Look around. Treat people with dignity, not because of who they are, but because of who you choose to be. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of second chances and the quiet strength of humility, please hit that subscribe button right now and share this video. You never know who needs to hear this message today. You never know whose heart is waiting for just a little bit of watering. Until next time, be kind to one another, because in the end, kindness is the only currency that truly counts. This is Judge Caprio, wishing you a good day.